Have you ever been turned into a joke by the very person closest to you, right in front of everyone I lived through? That. On my very last day at work, the day that should have been a warm farewell, my own husband and colleagues forced me into an apron, made me cook, and serve them like a maid at my own farewell party. But what they didn't know was this: a camera, a recording, and one person they thought was invisible changed everything. In the end, the very people who laughed at me were the ones lining up, bowing their heads to apologize. This is a story of endurance, betrayal, and the ultimate reversal they would never forget. Chapter 1. The beginning and an unsettling atmosphere. I still remember that morning vividly. Andrew sat beside me, his fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel, his mouth curled in a smirk, as though he had just told a joke that only he found amusing. "Can't believe you're leaving, Taylor," he said, his voice booming as if he wanted the whole world to hear. I didn't respond. I just kept my eyes on the window, watching the swarm of cars on the road, forcing my face to remain calm. Inside, I was in turmoil, but I knew that if I let even a hint of it slip, Andrew would seize it instantly and turn it into his entertainment. "Bake day for you," Andrew added, his tone dripping with insinuation. His fingers tapped harder against the wheel, as though he was eagerly waiting for something. A chill shot down my spine, my back stiffening. That phrase sounded mocking, but it also carried something ominous. Still, I forced a smile and muttered, "Yeah, I guess so." The car turned into the company parking lot. The building looked the same as always, rows of neatly trimmed trees, glass doors gleaming in the morning sun. Yet somehow that day it felt heavier than ever, as if even those glass walls knew that something terrible awaited me inside. Stepping into the hallway, the familiar sterile scent of disinfectant brushed past my nose. Everything looked exactly as it did every other day, yet the atmosphere was off. Conversations softened as I walked by. Glances flicked toward me, paired with awkward, hurried smiles. One colleague called out, "Good morning, Taylor." The words sounded friendly, but their eyes darted away, unwilling to meet mine. I smiled back, a thin, practiced smile I'd worn for years. At my desk, a stack of files was already waiting. Even on my last day, they had me buried in work. I hung up my coat, switched on my computer, and pretended to be absorbed in my inbox, though my heart thudded against my ribs. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening behind my back. Sure enough, when I glanced up, I caught a group whispering together. One of them flicked a quick look at me, then turned away abruptly. I managed to catch just a snippet. Is Andrew really going to do it? She'll be so shocked. I snapped my gaze back to the screen, my fingers stiffening on the keyboard as if the blood in my veins had frozen. Moments later, Andrew strolled past my desk. He whistled softly, the sharp scent of his cologne making me want to gag. Leaning in close, low enough for only me to hear, he murmured, "Don't eat too much at lunch. You'll need to save room for later." His sly smile spread wider, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of some cruel joke. I wanted to confront him, demand answers, but that look in his eyes made me falter. Instead, I lowered my head, pretending to type my hands, trembling against the keys. By noon, Andrew's voice rang across the office, dramatic and commanding. "All right, everyone, the time has come. Let's give Taylor the send-off she deserves." Chairs scraped back, muffled giggles filled the room. I stood, my heartbeat pounding like war drums. Some naive part of me still hoped maybe they'd prepared a cake, maybe a little card with kind words. I wasn't asking for much, just a bit of decency. But the moment I stepped into the break room and saw the eager, mocking glints in their eyes, my heart sank. Andrew stretched his arms out like a showman on stage. "Here it is, Taylor's farewell party." He paused for effect, then added with biting mockery, "And today she's going to do what she does best, serve us all." The room erupted with laughter. My heart plummeted straight to the floor. I stood frozen, my cheeks burning hot, my hands clenched tightly at my sides. Was this really how they wanted to remember me? After all those years of dedication, was I nothing more than cheap amusement? For Andrew and my colleagues, I couldn't bring myself to utter a word. and in that silence I knew this last day would haunt me forever. Chapter 2. The Humiliating Farewell Party. I stood frozen at the doorway of the break room, staring at the crowd of people laughing and chatting. They looked eager, as though they were about to watch a performance. Andrew smiled, his eyes gleaming like a man who had been scripting this moment all along. "Come on, Taylor, don't be shy." "This is your time to shine," he said, and from behind me, someone shoved a crumpled apron into my hands. I looked down at the object, still clinging to the desperate hope that this was just a fleeting joke. "Are you serious?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. Andrew burst out laughing. "Of course I am. It's tradition. The one who's leaving has to show everyone the thing they're best at. And for you, that's your devotion to serving. Don't let them down." Laughter rippled around me. Someone whistled. Someone else clapped. A few faces flickered with momentary unease, but soon enough they all turned away. No one spoke up for me. My back turned cold, a chill spreading down my spine. My hands dangled against the rough fabric of the apron. I wanted to throw it on the floor to scream in Andrew's face, but years of habit, years of bowing my head held me back. I took a deep breath and tied the strings behind me. A fresh round of mocking applause broke out. "That's the tailor," we know someone chimed. In front of me lay a long table piled with a jumble of ingredients. Raw chicken, unwashed vegetables, still clotted with dirt bags of cheap rice. Clearly no one had bothered to prepare properly. Everything was set out like some cheap, degrading challenge. "Hurry up, we're hungry," a woman's voice called, her eyes still glued to her phone. "Oh, and I don't eat onions," another added. "Make mine with extra meat. I hate small portions." I stood rigid, my fingers tightening around the knife on the cutting board. Each demand hit my ears like blades slashing at my pride. But still I began chopping vegetables, the knife's rhythm jagged with my uneven breaths. Behind me, laughter roared, chairs screeched, soda cans cracked open. Andrew sat at the center, a drink in hand, tossing out one barbed joke after another. "Don't burn it." "Taylor, your entire career depends on this meal." I clenched my teeth, letting my hands move on autopilot. The sting of chopped onions blurred my vision, though I wasn't sure if it was from the fumes or the tears threatening to spill. I buried everything under a blank mask. I cooked, I stirred, I plated each dish while behind me they toasted and chuckled as if savoring a well-orchestrated play. When I carried out the first tray of food, Andrew stood and raised his glass like a professional host. "Everyone, let's raise a toast to Taylor, the most dedicated employee, always ready to serve until the very last moment." His voice dripped with mockery. Glasses clinked in unison, laughter swelling. A few eyes darted away in shame, but no one intervened. I pressed my lips together and bowed my head. No different from a servant. Dish after dish, I kept bringing food out my hands, trembling with fatigue and suppressed fury. My shirt clung with sweat, strands of hair stuck to my face, but no one cared. They ate, they called for, seconds told me to wipe spills, demanded more napkins. I did everything silently, as though I had never been their colleague at all, just a nameless servant. When the feast finally wound down, the table lay in ruins, littered with greasy plates and scraps of food. Andrew clapped me on the shoulder, grinning broadly. "Well done. But don't forget the final part of the farewell party, clean it all up." Laughter exploded louder and freer now, because they knew they had humiliated me to the core. I stood there, my fists clutching the apron, my chest tight, but my eyes were dry. Not a single tear fell. I scanned the room, meeting the dozen pairs of eyes that had witnessed it all, and all of them had chosen silence. I knew then I couldn't count on any of them. When everyone left, the room was empty, but for me and the mountain of dirty dishes. I turned on the faucet, letting the torrent of water wash over the grease, while Andrew's mocking voice still echoed in the hallway. "Best farewell party ever," he boasted. I bit my lips, scrubbing plates, wiping stains, my hands raw and red from the hot water. In the reflection of the microwave door, I caught my own eyes, tired, hollow. Yet, deep inside a strange flame flickered, quietly burning. I knew this wasn't the end, and I would never let this humiliating party be my final chapter. Chapter 3: A lonely night and a secret piece of evidence. When I left the break room, my legs felt weighed down like they were shackled with stone. The hallway stretched endlessly before me. Andrew's laughter and that of my colleagues still echoed behind, chasing me down like a cruel shadow. I kept my head lowered as I walked toward the parking lot, afraid that if I looked up, I'd meet some half-hearted, pitying glance. That evening, my house felt colder than usual. I stepped inside, slipped off my shoes, dropped my bag to the floor, and the only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. I skipped dinner, my stomach empty yet locked tight. I went straight to my room, lay on my back, staring at the ceiling as the afternoon's mockery replayed in my head on an endless loop. Not polished enough. That's Taylor, always. Just the servant. Each word carved another fracture into my heart. My phone buzzed. A message from Andrew: "Thanks for playing along. Everyone really enjoyed it. You sure know how to leave an impression." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Part of me wanted to hurl the phone against the wall. Another part almost laughed at how accustomed I had grown to his brand of humiliation. I placed the phone face down without replying. What I didn't know was that at that same moment, someone else had seen everything. Frank, the company's janitor. He had passed by the break room when the raucous laughter erupted. He stopped silently, watching me sweat over the stove serving and cleaning, while my colleagues sat back reveling in their cruelty. He didn't intervene, he simply observed, and in his eyes a flicker of anger passed. A flicker I never noticed that day. That night, long after everyone had left, Frank returned to the break room. The room was pitch dark, still thick with the scent of cold food. He switched on the security monitor in the corner and quickly pulled the recording labeled 3:23 p.m., the exact moment Andrew raised his glass to mock me as the others roared with laughter. I never knew it, but Frank carefully copied the footage onto a small USB drive, slipped it into a white envelope, and scribbled a few hurried words on the front: "To Luke, C. Urgent." While I lay on my bed, eyes wide open, listening to the distant hum of cars outside, Frank left the building, with the envelope tucked safely in his bag. He wasn't my friend, nor was he family. But somehow he had chosen to stand on the side of justice. As for me, I was still oblivious. I lay there turning over weary thoughts in my mind. For years I had believed that patience and endurance would keep the peace. That if I worked hard enough, if I stayed kind enough, eventually I would be recognized. But tonight, after being paraded as a joke before everyone, I realized a brutal truth to them. I had never been a real person. I was merely convenience, a tool, the ever-ready Taylor. By then my tears had long dried. What replaced them was a hollow space in my chest, not sorrow, but a cold, quiet stillness. In that silence, one thought rose faint, but resolute. Enough. I will not let anyone render me invisible again. I didn't know then that my resolve had come at precisely the right time, and that the white envelope inside Frank's jacket would be the spark to ignite everything. Chapter 4: The CEO's Twist. The next morning, I arrived at the company earlier than usual. I had barely slept the night before, yet strangely my steps were no longer as heavy as they had been. I just wanted to move quickly, finish this final day, and leave this place behind forever. No sooner had I set my bag down on the desk than my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number lit up the screen. I hesitated before answering. A deep, steady voice came through. "Taylor, this is Luke Collins. I need you in my office immediately." I froze. Luke, the CEO, the name spoken in this company only with reverence. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "Yes, sir," I answered, my voice trembling. The hallway to the top floor stretched endlessly. When I knocked softly on the polished wooden door, his voice called out, "Come in." I stepped inside. The office was vast, sunlight streaming through tall glass windows. Luke stood with his back to me, hands clasped behind him. He turned his gaze sharp and cold. Sid, he gestured toward the chair across from his desk. I sat down timidly, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Without preamble, he opened the laptop on his desk and pressed a key. On the screen, I saw myself, hair disheveled. Apron, hastily tied hands, trembling as I chopped vegetables and carried trays of food. The booming laughter of my colleagues filled the room through the speakers, harsh and cutting. Then Andrew's voice rang out, unmistakable. She should thank me for giving her the chance to feel useful one last time. I froze my face, burning my hands, clenching rigidly on my thighs. Each image, each burst of laughter dragged me back into that room again. I tried to hold it in, but my eyes stung. Luke closed the laptop with a firm snap. Sitting across from me, his voice was low, deliberate. Taylor, I built this company on one principle: respect. What I just saw goes against everything I stand for, and I need you to understand this will not be ignored. I lifted my head, stunned. I had braced myself for silence, for dismissal, like all the times before. Instead, in his eyes, I saw fury tempered by resolve. Andrew thinks it was just a joke, I whispered. Luke's hands tightened into fists. That was no joke. That was a public humiliation. And worse, an entire group stood by in silence. He paused, his words slow and deliberate. They will be held accountable. He reached for his phone, tapped a few keys. At 10 o'clock this morning, I sent out a company-wide announcement, he said, his tone calm to the point of chilling. Everyone who took part yesterday has two choices: step into this office to apologize to you personally, or submit their resignation. The deadline is noon. I sat frozen like stone. Part of me trembled, but another part stirred with something unexpected relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't left to carry the weight alone. For the first time, someone had stood up and declared, enough. Luke's tone softened. I'm not asking you to forgive them, but I want you to see that here silence is no longer an option. I nodded faintly. Inside me, something cracked open, revealing a flame I thought had long since burned out. That flame whispered to me that from this day forward, nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 5. The public confrontation and Andrew's demotion. The air outside Luke's office was thick, heavy, like the calm before a storm. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw colleagues clustered in small groups, whispering. Their faces were taut with tension. Some had red, swollen eyes as if they'd been crying. Others kept their heads down, avoiding my gaze. For the first time in years, they no longer looked at me as if I were invisible. By noon, the CEO's office was packed. 15 people stood shoulder to shoulder, the silence pressing down like a weight. I sat in the chair beside Luke's desk, my heart pounding. In front of us stood Andrew. His face was pale. The arrogant smirk he usually wore had vanished. He fiddled with his tie-eyes, darting away, his hands buried deep in his pockets, as though gripping themselves tightly. Luke surveyed the room, his voice steady but icy. Yesterday you humiliated a colleague. All of you stood by, some even laughed. Now it's time for each of you to take responsibility for what you did. A suffocating silence followed. Then Margaret, the office manager, was the first to step forward. Her hands trembled, clasped tightly together. Taylor, I'm sorry. I saw everything. I should have stopped it, but I didn't. I am ashamed. Her voice faltered. I looked at her and only nodded slightly. There was nothing more to say. Next came Daniel, the young intern who had laughed the loudest yesterday. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his cheeks flushed crimson. I wasn't thinking. I just followed along with everyone. I'm sorry, Taylor. I really didn't mean it. I listened, but inside I felt nothing. Didn't mean it. It sounded no different than an excuse. One by one, they each stepped forward, their voices trembling, repeating the same rehearsed apologies. But I knew the fear of losing their jobs outweighed any true remorse. Their words were hollow, powerless to heal the wounds carved deep inside me. Finally, Andrew stepped forward. He drew in a deep breath, his voice lower than usual. Taylor, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to humiliate you. I thought it would be lighthearted fun. Fun, Luke cut in his tone like steel. He stood his gaze, sharp and piercing, straight into Andrew. You thought forcing an employee, your own wife, into an apron, making her cook and serve the entire office on her farewell day was fun, Andrew faltered. I only wanted people to remember the day. You're right, Luke interrupted, his voice rising sharper. They will remember, but not because Taylor served them. They will remember because you turned a farewell into a collective humiliation, because you betrayed the culture of respect this company was built on. The room fell into absolute silence. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my chest. Then Luke turned to me, his eyes softening slightly. Taylor, you've endured far too much, and now justice must be done. He faced Andrew again, his voice firm and resolute. As of this moment, you are demoted. You will take Taylor's former position. No more managerial role. No more authority. Just the very work you once belittled. Let's see how you manage when you are the invisible one. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Andrew's head snapped up, eyes wide, his face flushing red. No, you can't do this. I've given everything to this company. You betrayed this company. Luke cut him off, his tone sharp as ice. If you don't accept it, you may resign right now. The choice is yours. Andrew turned toward me, his eyes burning with fury, his jaw clenched tight. I met his gaze, without flinching, without lowering my head for the first time. To me, he was no longer my husband, no longer the man who controlled everything, just a defeated figure. No one spoke up to defend him. Colleagues stood still, their heads bowed. They knew the farce was over. At last, Andrew lowered his voice, choking on his words. Fine. I accept. His voice shook as if the words had been ripped from his throat. Luke nodded once. Good. Everyone may leave now. Andrew, you'll begin your new duties on Monday. One by one, people slipped silently out of the room. A few stole glances at me, ashamed, but also tinged with a strange respect. When only Luke, Andrew, and I remained, the air grew thick. I turned to Luke and gave a small nod. He met my eyes with a look that said, justice must be seen. As I rose to leave, walking past Andrew, I saw him hunched fists, clenched his face, twisted with rage and humiliation. In that instant, I felt a wave of release, unlike anything I had known. Not because he had been demoted, but because the truth had finally been laid bare. For the first time, he could no longer laugh at me in front of a crowd. And for the first time, I saw clearly the man who once seemed the strongest was in reality the weakest, stripped bare when his power was taken away. Chapter 6. A satisfying ending and rebirth. As I stepped out of Luke's office, the hallway was strangely quiet. The eyes that once slid past me as if I didn't exist now lingered, furtive, cautious. But I no longer felt the weight of them. I held my head high, each step lighter than the last. I returned to my desk. That familiar spot where I had sat for so many years now looked pitifully small. I began packing my belongings, an old mug, a few notebooks, a small photo I'd taken of a summer garden. Everything fit neatly into a single cardboard box. It took only minutes, yet it felt as though I was clearing away an entire chapter of my life. Across the room, Andrew was frantically shoving his own things into a box. His tie was crooked, his shirt wrinkled, his face flushed red as he crammed papers haphazardly inside. For the first time in years, he looked truly diminished. As I walked past, his eyes flicked to mine for a brief moment, bitter, hollow, but stripped of power, stripped of mockery. All that was left was desperation. I didn't stop. I set my box on the table, pulled out my phone. On the screen glowed a message I had drafted, Polish this. I attached a photo of the demotion letter signed coldly by Luke and hit send. A familiar ding chimed from Andrew's phone behind me. I didn't look back, but I knew his face must have drained of color. On the way home, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages from Andrew popped up. Taylor, this isn't fair. Then another, you think you're so clever. You won't survive without me. I glanced at them once, then calmly swiped left, erasing them all. There was nothing left to say. Silence was my final answer. At home, I set the box down by the door. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, bathing the room in gold. I brewed myself a cup of tea, sat at the table, opened my laptop. In my inbox, a new email awaited an official offer from HR, a remote consulting role, higher pay, flexible hours, and above all, a place where respect was the foundation. I read every line, a slow smile forming on my lips. I knew I could accept or I could decline, but the real victory wasn't in the contract. It was in the fact that I had stood up, survived every humiliation, and finally walked away whole. By evening, I stepped into my backyard. The breeze brushed through my hair, carrying the faint fragrance of flowers. I tilted my face toward the blue sky, my heart light. I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation from those who once made me invisible. All I needed was myself and the freedom I had reclaimed. My phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. Perhaps another colleague wanting to apologize one more time, or Andrew clawing for a last chance. I didn't care. I left it on the table, the ringtone echoing unanswered. I walked further, breathing in the fresh air, listening to the birdsong threading through the trees. For the first time in years, I no longer felt small. I no longer felt afraid, no longer weighed down. I was free. I was strong. And I knew one thing, with absolute clarity today, wasn't the end but the beginning of a new chapter 1 that I would write with my own voice. That day I walked out of the company with only a small box in my hands, but my heart was weightless. I was no longer the invisible woman they once dismissed. I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and most of all myself. Andrew lost everything, but I found freedom, and maybe that is the sweetest victory of all. If this story made you feel both furious and satisfied, hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments which part felt the most satisfying to you, and don't forget to subscribe and ring that little bell so you won't miss the next revenge, justice, empowerment story here on Scarlet Vows.